Welcome back. This is our final video for this unit. At this point, we've seen how to do completing the square, so if you've missed that video, make sure you go back and look at it. So we now know how to convert standard form functions into vertex form functions. But you might remember from the last video that we didn't have a values besides 1 for any of our functions. So this one is all about seeing how to do it when you do have an a value. So, for example, you might have a function that looks something like this. Y equals 3x squared plus 12x plus 8. So that 3 up front is going to make a bit of a difference. It doesn't change the entire process, but it does introduce a couple of new steps that we're going to have to be aware of. So let's go through it. Step 1 is the same as it was before. It's brackets. So we put brackets around our first two terms. So we've got 3x squared plus 12x inside our brackets. But already, if you look at this, something's wrong. If you can compare this to our standardized vertex form, which is a times x minus p squared plus q, you might notice that the a value, 3, actually needs to be on the outside of the brackets, not the inside. So that's going to be the next thing we're going to deal with. We're going to take the a value out by removing it as a common factor. So in this case, we need to take the 3 out of the brackets, which means we need to divide it from both terms. One thing to be aware of is it won't always divide nicely. So if that had been, say, a 10x instead of a 12x, we would still have to divide it by 3, which means you get either fractions or decimals. In our case, it does divide nicely, so we're just going to take our 3 out from both 3x squared and 12x. So 3 divided by 3 just gets us an x squared, and 12x divided by 3 gets us a 4x. And we still have that plus 8 at the end. Our next step is still the same as it was before, so we're still going to divide the x term by 2 and square it. So nothing has changed there. So in this case, that's going to be 4 divided by 2, which is 2, and then 2 squared, which is just going to take us right back to 4. So we've got y equals 3 times x squared plus 4x, and then just like before, we're going to add and subtract that 4 that we got inside of our brackets. So nothing new there. If you think back to the last video, our next step at this point was to move the 4 out, specifically the negative 4. And I told you that we had to put it inside the brackets first for a very specific reason that I would mention in this video. And so that is our next step. We're going to move the a value out, or it's not the a value, the negative value out. But this is going to be a slightly different process. So it's the same step, but we have to do something extra. So looking at what we've got up top here for a second, if you remember, this 3 beside the bracket means that we're multiplying 3 by everything in the brackets. So if you're thinking distributing, if I wanted to get rid of the brackets, I would do 3 times all of this stuff, which would be 3 times x squared, 3 times 4x, 3 times 4, and 3 times negative 4. Well, if I want to move this negative 4 out of the brackets, that means I'm moving it away from the 3. And so to account for that, I actually have to do that multiplication. So we're going to have to multiply that negative value by a, which in this case is 3. So we've got y equals 3 times x squared plus 4x plus 4. And then we still have the plus 8, and then so that minus 4 comes out, and it becomes a minus 12 because we multiply it by our a value. From this point, it's just a straight shot to the end following the exact same steps that we did before. So last thing we're going to do is we're going to simplify and factor. So we've got y equals 3. And so remember, the factoring of the brackets, it's always just going to be half of your x coefficient. So x squared plus 4x plus 4 just becomes x plus 2 squared. And then 8 minus 12 gives us negative 4. And there we are. We've made it through. This is now in vertex form. So the key things to look out for is to remember to take out the a value by factoring it, and then to multiply by a when you move your negative value out. That's the only thing that's different. So the general process is still the same. It's just a couple of small extra steps. All right, so going through one more quick example together. Y equals 4x squared plus 72x minus 9. Actually, you know what? Let's make this negative 4x squared to help illustrate a point. So, going through our steps, I'm going to put brackets around my negative, or my first two terms, negative 4x squared and plus 72x minus 9. Negatives do cause some issues here. They don't change anything, but they're a common point of mistakes. So we're going to start by taking out our a value, which is negative 4, from both negative 4 and 72. So keep in mind you're dividing. The first thing just becomes an x squared, like it always will. But this positive 72 is going to be divided by negative 4, which means it becomes minus 18. So you got to be really careful with your negatives here. And then we still have minus 9 at the end. Next, we divide by 2 and we square. So 18 divided by 2 is 9, and 9 squared is 81. So we're going to add and subtract 81 inside the brackets. Now we're going to move the negative term, which is the minus 81, out of the brackets. And again, we have to be careful here, so we're going to multiply it by our a value. But keep in mind, if you're multiplying a negative 4 and a negative 81, that changes things. So two negatives makes a positive. So we actually end up moving out a positive 364. Unfortunately, give me one sec. My thing seems to have stopped accepting my pencil. There we are. So we've got negative 4 times our 81, which gets us positive 324. So now we combine this all together. We've got y equals negative 4. We factor the brackets, we get x minus 9 squared. And then we combine the stuff at the end, and we get positive 315. So you have to be very careful when you're dealing with the negatives, or else you're going to run into some trouble here. All right. So I'll give you one more to do on your own. This one's going to have decimals, so you have to be really careful, but I think you'll be able to handle it. So we've got y equals 2 x squared plus 5x plus 6. So pause here, run through it on your own, and come back and check once you're done. All right, hopefully that went not too badly. Dealing with decimals can be kind of tricky with these things, but as long as you're careful, it shouldn't be too bad. So, just like always, we start by putting up some brackets. And right off the get-go, this is where things get kind of annoying. So we take out our 2, and I mentioned to you before, you have to divide it even if it doesn't divide nicely. So 2 doesn't come out of 5 super well. Unfortunately, that means we just have to deal with the decimals. So 5 divided by 2 is 2.5. And now we just continue from here. So 2.5 divided by 2 is 1.25. And 1.25 squared is 1.5625. So that's what we're going to be adding and subtracting inside of our brackets. So we've got x squared plus 2.5, and then adding 1.5625, and subtracting 1.5625. And as always, don't forget your plus 6 or whatever your c value is at the end. So now we move the negative out. The 2 is positive, so we don't have to worry too much about it this time. So 2 times 1.5625, if you plug that into your calculator or you do it by hand, you're going to get 3.125. And so now doing our simplifying and our factoring. The brackets, like always, it's just going to be half of the x value. So this is going to be x plus 1.25 squared. And then the stuff at the end, when we combine, we get plus 2.875. And so there we are. That is completing the square. That is how you convert any function in standard form to vertex form for whatever purpose you want, graphing or whatever else. And that's the end of this unit. So we do have our test coming up. Everybody's going to be doing it at the same time, so make sure you check out the info for that. And make sure you contact me if you have any questions.